Appreciate y'all for joining us. We're here at the incubator in Cleveland, Ohio. We're here to have a roundtable discussion about American skin. I'm here with my brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated Poly Chapter, and we're going to go around the table and introduce our guests and go from there.
How you doing, everyone? My name is Tim Roberts. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, initiated in Pi Chapter in fall 2019.
How we doing? My name is Alon Sizemore, also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Pi Chapter, initiated in fall of 2019.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Naiman, a member of Delta Tau Delta, initiated fall 2018.
Hi everyone, my name is Nathan Shapiro, member of Delta Tau Delta, initiated in 2020.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Austin Watkins. I'm part of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated Pi Chapter, initiated in spring 2020.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyler Burleson. I'm a member of Xavier Chapter, Delta Tau Delta, initiated in fall 2018.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. We'll get right into it. So, this was a very powerful movie, a lot of great points that came up. What were you all's first feelings and thoughts after finishing watching the movie? We can start wherever.
I'll start. I was angry, mostly because in movies like that, you sort of expect a happier ending. First of all, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, you're gonna get spoilers watching this, just so you know. But it was sort of, it was irritating, just because you can in turn do or make the right decision or a wrong decision and still face consequences. And I guess that's what the movie was sort of trying to get at. But it was just disheartening, because the actions that were sort of taking place within the movie were taking place because of the frustration that was brought about. And the end of the movie didn't necessarily alleviate the frustration, because at the end of the day, I look at it like this: like, race is not necessarily an individual problem, right? Race is a political, systematic issue. So understanding that no matter how sorry the cop was, right, for the actions that he had taken, the actions that he had partaken in, understanding that he's just a representative of a system, and so you can get as mad at the individual as much as you can, right, as much as you want to, but if the system isn't made for you, the movie just showed there's not necessarily an easy way out. It's only, say that again?
There is no happy ending.
There isn't a happy ending. There isn't a happy ending.
Anybody else?
I also feel that, when we talk about the ending there, maybe the point in the argument that the producers were trying to make is that the problem is the reproduction of these issues.
Yeah.
In that, as his hands were up, he was acknowledging, that this is what occurred and I'm surrendering. He still was shot. And I think, and then with the news clips at the end, where you see the reporters going from saying that it was connected to Islamic extremists and making all these crazy assumptions up.
Right.
And then, even more importantly, they went to the clip of the NBA basketball clip to show how people just forget about this, and that is the problem. So I think that ending was a key part of the main argument of this film. So it's a great part to bring up first to start the discussion.
So going off of that, we'll jump right into it, the ending. What did you all think about the ending? What did you take from it? Maybe you brought some really good points there. What really stood out to you about the ending and how it was delivered?
So my view of the ending, it was like just showing how no matter what, like, things are not changing. Like, it's the reoccurring thing, like you said. And that's the problem. It's like, we address one issue and then one person gets off. And then we got, how do we prevent it from happening again? That's one thing that we're not coming up with as people, as, you know what I'm saying? So that's like one thing. I was hurt because it's like, he did all of this to try to prove a point, yet, and still somebody killed him. You know, he's still another black man dead, even after putting his hands up his surrender.
And then also too, it's just, if you think about, he was on his phone with his wife towards the middle of it. He was telling her like, why does our people always have to be the ones? We take it on one cheek, we take it on the other cheek, sometimes we take it on the third cheek, and we're expected to walk away. You know, and every other group of people, they tend to lash out, and for them it's justified. You know, so it was interesting for him to say that and then come back and then it's a blank gun. You know, so it's like, again, we're trying to teach like how we feel, and then he does this thing. The lesson is learned throughout the police department, and then he goes out and then he's shot, as everyone has kind of hinted towards. Spoiler alert. So it's just frustrating that we always try to take this high road, and of course the actions were extreme, by taking over a police department. No one has done that thus far. That's like not, the common route. But he does all that. He teaches. He does the right thing to do at that point in time, and he's still punished for it. Or at this case, like,
Executed.
yeah. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, I want to touch on a little bit like what Nathan was saying about like the news cycle aspect of it, because I feel like that hits really close to like what happened recently, right? Like we had a lot of stuff happening in the summer, but like the news cycle just wasn't long enough for anything to actually happen. Like, I mean, sure, we got the conversation out there a little bit, but like, then the election happened, and like, what have we heard of since? And that's just really tough. And I think they like hit it spot on at the end of the movie there.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I mean, and you talk about the news cycle, the media, I want to just get you guys' take. I remember last summer, one of the things that went around were the Blackout Tuesday swear. What was everyone's take on that? Like, how did you guys perceive that? Do you think that was positive, or do you think that derailed from the movie?
So for me, along with like the Blackout Tuesday, and it kind of goes along with Colin Kaepernick and his knee, I think all of that is to raise awareness. And by now, if you're not aware of the situation that's going on in the world today, it's like there's really not much we can do for you. There's been so much like measures taken from people, and in everyone's community. So if you're not aware by now, it's not much we can do. So right now it's more of like the preventative measures, which Nate Parker, the writer and actor in the movie, said this was for. It's more of the preventative measures and actual steps to take place that can stop the cycle that's going on. And it's going to have to be something kind of outlandish, because it can't be within the system, because the system really wasn't built to be taken down by itself. So it's just, we have to figure out a way to take it down within our communities, and kind of with the awareness thing, take that next step instead of like these talks are good because it's between communities, it's between people who can go back to their communities and have these conversations with their own. We really have to stop with just social media. Like, social media is a good start, but it's not the end all be all.
100%. To piggyback off of that, it's like my take on Blackout Tuesday and all that. It was like, all right, you posted on social media, like we didn't do anything. Just like anybody can go on camera and yell Black Lives Matter, and yell like no justice, no peace. But like, what are we actually doing? Are we actually holding people accountable when we see stuff? Are we actually, taking the necessary steps to go to these city halls, to go to these places, and actually sit down and talk to people? One thing I see around, everybody marches and everybody, screams and stuff like that, screams what they should see done, but nobody's doing anything. So I think like it was a good movement to get people aware, but actions speak louder than words.
I will say though one thing, I do think that although the Blackout Tuesday and things like instituting like a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to various programs, those are the start, and they have to, more must be done. But I will say though, there was, in my opinion, one blessing in disguise of everything that did occur, is that because we were in the pandemic, because people were at home, people had access and the time to read about it, and to hear about it, and to care about it. potentially more than they would have if it was just a regular time in a non-pandemic world. And I do think that that has initiated the spark. That is not the end-all be-all, absolutely. But I do think that, you know, that definitely was a piece in time that, you know, is definitely something to continue to build off of. And it was one aspect of the things that occurred this summer that, you know, something to continue to move forward with.
To that same tone, I agree with what you said, right? It definitely gave people a chance to truly be able to sort of truly sit down and dissect certain situations. But coming from a black man, like that's something that was not necessarily for us. That was for people like you all to see, just because we've been dealing with these same issues since our parents were kids, since their parents were kids, since their parents were kids. And so it's not something that we were naive to. So it's sort of, if anything, it's sort of relieving that people outside of our culture finally got the chance to sort of just sit down and try to understand. Because also, truth be told, no matter how much we want you all to understand, because you're not experiencing it, you can't understand it fully. But it definitely was a great first step for you all, not necessarily for us, but for you all to finally be able to sit down and go on your Twitter and go on your Instagram or open up a newspaper, or go into your YouTube or whatever it might be, and sort of see the anger and see the frustration and see the legitimate steps that we have tried to take that didn't work. Because another issue that we face is the people that are in power who might not necessarily look like us, they feel like they have all the answers, as opposed to dissecting the situation from the eyes of the people that are in it. And I feel like this summer was sort of the first opportunity for everybody to not necessarily even have a choice, but to take it on the chin and to be able to look at it. Because before the pandemic, it was definitely a situation where people could sort of choose to turn the other way. During the pandemic, it wasn't any of that. You had to sort of see it, because if you're on a college campus, you have somebody that wasn't raised, no matter if they were black or not. If you go home, or if you go, you go home and you go to like a shopping complex, and you're on your Instagram news feed, you see angry people, and you finally get a chance to see why that anger is legitimized. And so it was very impactful for us, I feel like, for you all to be able to just truly see, sort of, to an extent, what we go through and what we've been so angry about for such a significant amount of time. So sort of to that same tone with the question that Trey said, I feel like it should have been more than just Blackout Tuesdays, because reverting back, protesting is not something that's new. And for all of us that sort of are conscious, we know that the government has adapted a very long time ago to protest. So it's sort of time to get more creative in our thinking and how to enact change, which is why it was so good that people in our generation who might not have grown up in a household full of the different prejudices that were sort of taught to people 50, 60 years ago, to where we can now sit down in a conversation like this and come to a general consensus about what's necessary to make legitimate change outside of protests, outside of Instagram posts, outside of people just walking down the street saying that they're angry. We are now sort of all in a position now to where we are relatable enough to each other to where we can begin to work with each other on fixing the change. So when it comes to Blackout Tuesday, going all the way back to the summer, I feel like that's what the best part of the summer was.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing what you have to say about protest. And that's something I've been thinking about, listening to people talk especially about Colin Kaepernick, because, you know, they tell you that you're supposed to protest nonviolently. You're supposed to protest in a way that is acceptable, but then I can't think of anything much more acceptable than a lot of these protests we've been seeing, where you're taking a knee during the national anthem. You know, there's not much more and less offensive than that. Right. So there's this cycle of people thinking that they know the right way to do something, they know the right way, and that what you're doing is wrong. And the ability to see that and not have to look at it and stare at it and like live in it, marinate in it, is a huge privilege. And I think that is something that we're all forced to reckon with in a way that oftentimes white people don't have to, in a way that people of color are forced to every single day because it's part of your lived experience.
I appreciate your perspective on that, 1,000%. I think it's also just commemorative of guys like Colin Kaepernick and even Nate Parker. I watched an interview a couple of days before, and he was just speaking on like how much pride he had to like choke up. He asked me, like these white producers, if he could make a video, a movie, explaining the problems of black people, which in turn can take dollars, out of their white hand. So it's very, frustrating. It's just hard to think of any other ways to get the word out, and not using the white man, but then also bringing up the black people. It's just, it's a confusing thing, and that's why we're still so hard in trying to figure out the right way to do it. We've tried protests, and then people in control want us to follow their rules so that we can't take a knee, and then riots, obviously, whatever your take on it is with the looting and all of that. So it's just, we're trying to find a way for our voices to be heard, and you can't please everybody. So it's just, you just run into a dead end.
So conversations like this is obviously a really good starting point, but what are future action steps? What are some of the things that need to happen in order for a change to truly be made, in order for this not to be every couple of years now Black Lives Matter, and how can we actually make things happen, or how do you think we go about seeing change?
First of all, I'm a political science major, so forgive me for being able to sort of just be the first one to the microphone. But in my opinion, the first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be more people a part of the institution who can relate to the issues of minorities. Because it's so easy for you to sit in the boardroom as a white American who might be, let's use city council for an example. People don't necessarily understand how important city council members are. If you're a city council person and you're white and you are the council person over a precinct or a ward that is majority African Americans, then you can't relate directly to the issues that they face in that area. So you don't necessarily know about how big of an issue vandalism might be, or how big of an issue dirt bikes on side roads might be, or violence firsthand, or the education system, or how the medical institutions don't necessarily pay as much attention to those communities. You don't necessarily know that off the top of your head, so you don't necessarily know what you're fighting for. As opposed to an African American being a part of that institution, representing those people, representing the people that he comes from or she comes from. When you've grown up in it and you've been immersed in it, you know based off of the look of somebody's face when they need help, as opposed to them having to force themselves to feel comfortable with bringing up certain issues to them, especially the issues that you can't see. So the first thing that needs to happen is African Americans need to get into more political positions of power. And politics doesn't necessarily mean working for the government, but there's politics in everything. There's politics in the medical field. There's politics in education. There's politics in clergy. So being able to be involved in decision making on multiple levels is what's necessary, because you can't expect for issues to be changed if you don't have somebody in those positions to directly relate to the issues so that they can understand how important it is. Because, for example, you don't necessarily know that certain food banks are necessary in certain areas because of the fact that you weren't there from a certain amount of time to a certain amount. People have just grown callous to only eating 1 or 2 meals a day. So they think it's normal, as opposed to being or having experience elsewhere and being able to see, okay, yeah, these are how these people are living and it's right. Morally, this is how people should be living. But because of the fact that those people in those different areas are ignorant to those opportunities and resources, they don't even know that they need them for themselves. So what's necessary is for us to be able to go away, come back with whatever it is, resources that we have, understanding that this is what's necessary to push this area, or push this community, or push this group of people to the next level.
What I believe needs to happen, and this is something that's been said many times, but I feel like people still don't do it, it's called accountability. Accountability. Like, there are many instances where white people may see their friends like saying something or doing something that they know is racist, that they know is prejudiced, but they don't say nothing because they don't want to get involved, or because they scared of what their friends gonna think of them because they're helping out. Like, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, if that was happening to you, you would want somebody to step in. And one thing that we have a problem with is holding each other accountable. Stop being blind to the fact that our friends and our peers are doing things like this. Literally. Like take police officers, for example. Certain police officers get off because their friends, like, don't hold them accountable. They live every day happy. They live every day happy while our people are getting killed. Like, it shouldn't never be a fact where a cop kills a black man and that black man can't go home to his family, but the same cop gets to go home to his family every day, and his friends still haven't said that, or he is still not held accountable for his actions. So accountability definitely is something that I feel like needs to happen. Like, we keep saying it, but we're not doing it, and I think more accountability needs to be held.
So off of that accountability aspect, so how are we able to hold each other?
Can we get a perspective from one of you guys? Just because this is the purpose of the conversation. We just need to be able to hear multiple perspectives. So one of you guys can grab the mic. We can figure out, or try to figure out how to build a conversation off of whatever it is that you all feel is necessary to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much. I think accountability is a lot of what I think is important. I mean, I think it's important to all of us, and being in a fraternity, like, it's something that we learn, but honestly, like, we don't really learn it until we get to, like, where we are. Like, in school, like, you don't want to be the snitch, like, you don't, even, like, with your friends, like, you don't really want to kill the vibe. I feel like, and that's, like, people say that all the time, like, don't be the vibe killer. And, like, I get that, but I think that is, like, a really important point. And going back to, like, a point that you said earlier, like, if you don't have representation of people who, like, understand what people's situations are, like, it makes it very difficult to even, like, figure out a solution. It's funny, like you said, they think they know everything, but they've never spent any time in the community. And I just think, I don't really know how you do it, but, like, you have to interact with people. I mean, like, it's really nice that we get to come together and talk, like, be cool with each other. But, most of America is, like, it's like white people at white schools, and then you have black communities at black schools. Like, it's very difficult. I mean, I think I was very lucky to go to a school where there was a solid amount of white people and black people. But, like, coming to Case, that's not the case. There's, like, a very clear, like, distinction of, like, the people that go to Case, and, like, it just feels very off. I don't really know how else to say it.
Yeah, just going off that, I think talking about race makes most white people really uncomfortable. And that definitely includes me. I think I've spent a large portion of my life being mostly ignorant about what exactly, like, systemic racism is, or what it looks like beyond just individual interactions. So, like, I think the way I see it, there's sort of a couple steps to building up to the point where you're capable of accountability. First, you gotta know what it is that you're talking about. You gotta be aware of other people's lived experiences. Because if you're not aware of their experiences, then you don't have the context to enter into those conversations. But then from there, you got to be able to build the intent and the ability to be able to speak up. And I think that's where a lot of people falter. Is it is really difficult to have that conversation with your friend when maybe you're not sure whether or not you're right about something, or you're not sure if you're overreacting or misinterpreting something that they said. But it's something that is just of such dire importance that it needs to be done.
think also, as far as points you made, getting people in positions of power in the institutions that have such large control, who have had the lived experiences to understand what the people that their decisions are affecting are going through is so crucial. And I think one specific institution that should really be focused on, I mean, everyone should, but one specific one I think is education. And I think because the education that we receive is politicized. Because as you mentioned, everything has to do with power.
Right.
And I think, one key thing that I've noticed, throughout my education is that we learn about history, but not about like the historical resident.
Right.
Meaning that we learn that there was enslavement from 1619 to, well, we learned that, enslavement to Jim Crow laws, that's 1619 to 1969.
Yeah.
Nearly 86% of the African American experience is under those conditions. And the key point in education is, well, the question has to be asked, well, what does that mean for now? Because if you just learn the past but not understanding what the implications are, then you can't apply the information and be able to have more of an understanding of the current situation. So I think, especially in education as an institution, that specifically needs to have the right people in power making the decisions of what our youth are learning.
So going back to that accountability piece and tie it back into the movie, one of my favorite scenes was when the two Latino officer and the Latino inmate had their back and forth. And basically how they had that dialogue. Can we get some, let's just conversate about that. Let's conversate about, unfortunately we don't know exactly what the inmate said. I would have loved to know what that was, but how did you all perceive that interaction?
It literally showed how a system can change a person. Like, just like that Hispanic guy grew up probably the same way the inmate did. But, due to circumstances in life, like he ended up being who he was, like being a cop, and the other guy ended up being an inmate. But one thing that like people have to stop doing is that even black people, like when we get to these positions of power, we gotta stop like falling into the system. Like we gotta stop changing our views because we got these positions. At the end of the day, we still have to remember where you came from. Because our journeys are all different, but at the same time, you know that it's somebody just like you that is growing up or living through something very traumatic and stuff like that, and they don't know how to get through it, so they fall to different things. And now you're looking at down upon them, just like how white people in power look down upon you when you were young. So it's just like, it showed like, dang, the dude get this position of power, he get into a job like being in law enforcement, that now he start thinking he's better than me. And we grew up the same, or we the same color. Because at the end of the day, two black cops, a black cop and a black inmate, they not no different. The system don't look at them no different. If a black cop was to get shot and killed, it wouldn't be as big as if a white cop got shot and killed. Just the same way as if a white kid got killed, it would be a bigger story than a black boy getting killed, So that's what I would got from that.
So from that scene, I perceived it in 2 ways. So I partially perceived it in the way you did, but also as a black man, that scene really hit me. Because I often feel like we have to be held to such a higher standard, and we have to be able to set the bar and really prove ourselves worthy just to get to the position we are. But oftentimes, members of our community don't realize that, and like he was saying to the inmate, he's like, you thug, you do this, you do that. And I try to build myself up, but I just keep getting knocked down because of your actions. So I think that came back to the accountability part. Like, how do you hold your community accountable when you're trying to achieve, but do you also feel like part of your community doesn't always understand that? So I kind of perceived it a little bit of a different way. Anybody else want to add anything? So, go ahead.
I think it's a tough topic, one, because we don't know exactly like what was going on in the conversation, obviously. And I don't want to assume like anything in the Latina community. But going off what you said, it's just all about education. You know, everyone's not, like the police officer, he went through, I'm sure, extensive amount of training and education to learn, you know, the things and how to be, you know, the model citizen or whatever you want to call it. Everyone's not privy to that education, so I think it's on us as we're all like in college, you know, we're educated to go back into our communities who are less fortunate to teach them, you know, what we know, and not just assume that they have to be in college because college isn't for everyone, and the things that we learn, everyone's not privy to. So it's just on us. That's another responsibility and accountability for us to take on and educate those when we go back home, you know, for Christmas or whatever it may be. So that's how I kind of see it.
Further, I think the police officer, I think his approach is very ignorant, and he, like Austin, like you were saying, he looked down upon. But how could he have done a better job of teaching, like Alon said, and going back and providing resources to help his community or help people that look like him better their opportunities instead of looking down upon them?
Being somebody who's worked in the community for a significant amount of time, my family has also worked in the community for a significant amount of time too. A lot of times just being there and being seen and allowing yourself to be seen as their role model is enough. Because truth be told, coming from the schools that I've come from, our age group and younger, we don't want to have conversation anymore. And I think it's a product, I think it's because we're a product of generations who have been patient for so long that we just don't feel the need to be patient anymore when it comes to being told to sit down and listen, that this is what you need to do every time for you to be able to do this, that, and third. I think just being there, right? So with the example from the cop, it will be nothing for the cop to patrol around the neighborhood that he grew up in, where he knows families. This guy out of the car brought a football with him and started playing football in the middle of the street with some kids on the street. It will be nothing for that cop, or not even just using him right now, but other cops, right? Let's talk about cops that are in Cleveland, right? It will be nothing for them to volunteer at food banks. It will be nothing for them to volunteer at toy drives and book bag giveaways so that they can sort of have the children come to them and people who look up to them come to them, as opposed to just being sort of negligent to that group of people and then their first encounter being when they get in trouble. I feel like that's another issue that we have in our community. We fear law enforcement so much because of the institution that it represents that we don't feel like it's necessary for us to even interact with them because they don't interact with us. We were never taught that. All the time, and my father was a police officer. And at a certain point, to a certain extent, he even told me to not get too comfortable around police officers. Because at the end of the day, yeah, he is a part of that group, but that doesn't mean that he trusts them when it comes to me, because I'm not a police officer. I don't have a badge on me. I don't have a badge number. I'm not in that group. And so it's a legitimate fear to have. But that fear is only there because of the lack of interaction between the two groups. So it's about shifting directly to the police conversation. It's about shifting the responsibility from policing to serving, right? They're there to serve us, not to police us. Yes, they are police officers, but the purpose of police officers is to be able to take care of the people who need to be taken care of. And there's more than one way to take care of people that are in disenfranchised communities. There is. It's not just crime that we have to fight. We have to fight hunger. We have to fight education. We have to fight a large list of disparities. When we can come down and we can come together, we can get them to come down to our level and try to just be there. And in another instance than taking someone to jail or trying to pose a threat or trying to scare someone, then that'll be the moment when the connectivity is grown. That'll be the moment when we can have a conversation with inmate, a police officer, and the inmate's just like, dang man, like, I really messed up. Like, can you have conversation with me? Like, what should I have done, or what can I do when I get out? Or not have an issue between a police officer and an inmate when the inmate's like, yo, honestly, they really did get the wrong guy. Like, I didn't do this. But we're not comfortable enough with the institution for us to even be able to have those conversations in the first place. And that goes all the way back to the grassroots issue of not being seen in another light, right? So honestly, I think just being there, being seen for kids who are in kindergarten all the way up until whenever they leave the community, if they ever leave the community. But that's where it starts. That's where it starts.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that, but just something like that came to my mind is like, if you think about like little white kids and like, who their role models are, like it's like police officers and firefighters, like that's just like something that I was thinking about. It's like so different.
Yeah.
Like my nephew, like every time he sees a police officer, he like wants to go up and talk to him, and that's just something that would never happen on the other side. Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Do you think like growing up that you were taught that, or like why do you think that is?
I think part of it is representation, and it's like that. It's not the fault. Like it is the system, right? Of like who wants to be a cop? Like if I go and I see that like my mom tells me that cops are good, and then I go look at cops and talk to them, and one day I become a cop, like that's just a route that would not happen. And like again, it like is very helpful to have people who look like you in these positions that serve you.
He's absolutely correct. Representation is everything. Representation is everything. You can't tell someone that you want to be this if you don't see people that look like you in that position or in that occupation. This year, not this year, but this past graduating class of Cleveland's fire department was 70% white men. 70% white men. So not talking about white women, like white women weren't accounted for, Latinos, all the other minorities were in the bottom 30%. But Cleveland is a majority black city. Cleveland is a majority black city. Black people are not the minorities in Cleveland. They're not. But somehow, some way, 70% of the graduating class for the police, or not the police, but for the Cleveland Fire Department was 70% white males. That's the answer to your question right there. Like you can't see someone, or you can't grow up to want to be someone that you don't necessarily see for yourself. That's why the conversation with little white kids might be, oh yeah, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it might be. But with black students, it always goes to what? Sports first, then entertainment. And then if you're blessed with parents who are socially conscious enough to tell you that you can be something other than those things, then that's where it'll go from there. And then you're looked at as an anomaly in your community because you don't want to be, or you don't want to be that, or your interest is drawn to something else. So that's really just a representation thing. And that's where it starts at the grassroots, but it also starts at the top too. That's why you have to have people in those powerful positions, but you also have to have people in those positions who might not even necessarily look at kids, or might not necessarily look like the black kids that they're supposed to be representing. But if you go into a classroom, sit down and have conversations with that black kid and let them know that that's a possibility. Because they don't know that it's there. They don't even know that it's real. Like, could you imagine growing up all through elementary and middle school, being told that in school for maybe 2 hours in a month and a half, that being a firefighter or a police officer is a possibility, but when you open up your book and look at that firefighter or police officer, they're white. But then you go home and you're listening to music on the car ride home. You go home and you turn on the TV, your dad's watching sports, or your mom's watching American Idol, or she's watching some other show on BET, right? And everybody else that you see on the screen is black. But the only time that you see somebody who is in public service is when you're in school for maybe during the school year, when you open up a book and you have like maybe a job fair or something like that, for maybe 8 or 9 hours total in the school year, you see that white face as a representative of somebody who's supposed to be protecting you. You don't necessarily relate or even know that's a possibility. So that representation is key, but representation is a full circle thing. All this stuff sort of ties together in one way or another, right? So at home as well as classroom stuff. So this COVID also sort of proved to people how important house structures were for children. And at the end of the day, being a child's first role model is everything to that child, right? So as the first sort of line of defense, as the first role model of that child or for that child, as the first teacher of that child, it's your duty and opportunity as a parent overall, not just as a black parent, but especially as a black father, to let your child know truthfully that they can do anything that they put their mind to. There aren't limitations on whatever it is that you feel like you can or cannot do. The only limitations that you have is whatever limitations you place on yourself. And once we make that crystal clear to children, our creativity that we just have innately is going to take over in them to a point where we have never seen before. And so once you instill that bout of confidence in them, then the world will truly be theirs.
To piggyback on what you said, I totally agree with that. I also believe that when we do so-and-so make it out, like a lot of us don't come back.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of black athletes, like one specifically, his name's Corey Graham. He's from Buffalo, played for the Baltimore Ravens, and he played for the Bills, and he got a couple Super Bowls or whatever. But one thing that he did was he came back to the inner city community and did football camps with us. Usually, the NFL teams, they don't go to the inner cities and do football camps and go to the schools like that. They go to those suburban white schools where they're predominantly white students. So it's like, as black men, when we make it out, when we get rich, and when we get a little bit more money, instead of like us just leaving and never turning back, like we need to start coming back. Like we need more opportunities out there. Like growing up in Buffalo, all we had around us was basketball, football, and music. You know, but you go, when I didn't know nothing about lacrosse, hockey, and a little bit, not even really baseball or anything until I got to high school. And I went to a Catholic school that was predominantly white in high school. Like, it shouldn't be me waiting until I'm 16 years old to figure out that there's other things in this world. Like, we don't have many opportunities in our communities. Like, if the only thing in my community is football, that's the only thing I'm gonna be able to do. If I have to drive 45 minutes just to go to a lacrosse practice or just to go to learn about art and history and stuff like that, like that's ridiculous. And so I think as black men, when we make it out, when we getting our money, when we are getting rich and getting wealthy, we start putting it back to the communities instead of taking it and just burning away.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, from a white man's perspective, I think we have if we're in a position, whatever we're in, we have a responsibility to empower, marginalized identities, because it can't just be, black men, empowering black men. Obviously that's huge, but white men need to empower black men, Asian men, Latino, everyone, and women and all gender minorities as well. And I think that, when individuals, white individuals are in power, they have to, check their biases, have conversations, and be as open to as many diverse people, perspectives, and experiences as they can be.
So prior to your first interaction with a black individual, what were like some of the preconceived notions or some things that you may have misconstrued or ideas that you had prior?
Yeah, it's kind of a tough question to answer because, like I said, I just wasn't very aware of race when I was really young. It was just not something I was ever forced to think about or reckon with. Gosh, I don't know. It would be really hard to answer that question, I think.
Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, mine's kind of similar too. I mentioned earlier, like I grew up in the South Lyndhurst area. So I grew up where there was like no notion of race, I guess, when I was like in kindergarten, and there was just a bunch of different people who were different. Like it didn't feel different, right? Like I was much older when I even started thinking about race, I guess. And I guess like I was so young, so I don't have too much to add, but it definitely like started to get like a little more intense, I guess, as I got into middle school, and like there was like more of a clear distinction between like me and my peers that I grew up with. Like sometimes I was the white boy, and like it like with these lines made it like an extra step to kind of like get to know the people that I went to school with every day. And it like is an important distinction, like just given the problems that we have to solve. But it's something to think about, like, where it was so easy for me as like a little kid to like get along with everybody, and like the friction that came later.
Okay, so the next one of the major scenes in the movie was when the officer finally admitted that yes, he racially profiled, and that was the reason that he pulled Lincoln over. So let's talk about racial profiling and how it's come to fruition, and what are you all's thoughts on racial profiling?
So I'm actually a victim of racial profiling. When I was 11 years old, I was walking with my oldest brother, and someone had just got robbed like 2 blocks away from us. And the cops had stopped me and my brother while we were walking, and thought that my brother was one of the ones that did the robbery. And when the sketch came out, my brother was nothing like the person. And like that experience, like seeing that firsthand, it just kind of hurts, because like the only way that people look at us is what they see on TV or what they see on news, like in the media and our songs or whatever the case may be. And it's just like, why are we judging the next black person on one black person? You know, like we all are different people essentially. Like I do not look like you, I don't look like him. We all are different in a sense of the way we look. So I feel like that just hit a different little spot. Like it just felt like, man, I can't even walk down the street without being profiled as a robber or as a gangster or as a thug or something. Like, and my brother, so it was just hurtful experience.
So now I'll play devil's advocate a little bit with racial profiling. Do you think racial profiling is an essential part of what police officers have to do in order to do their job?
Absolutely not.
Where the officer finally admits why he pulled Lincoln over and decided that they looked as if they were a threat, which was racial profiling. Why do you think it's so deeply rooted in the police community to racially profile? Why do you think that's come to fruition?
I think that's come to fruition because of, first of all, the system that police officers represent, right? Police officers were never necessarily created in favor of minorities overall, right? So if you go all the way back to the history of sheriffs and police, they were meant to police newly freed or newly independent African Americans.
Started before
That's exactly. So that was the purpose of police officers in the first place.
control.
Pair that with the fact that they represent an institution that is never meant for African Americans as well. So the teachings might not necessarily be direct, but the people who are drawn towards that, the people who are the people who are actually police officers, the people who are teaching these police officers, have never necessarily, unless they are African American, have never, most of the time, historically especially, experienced African Americans or have wanted to experience African Americans in a sense that's farther than correcting them. And so when you take that away and you bring it back to, like we said at the very beginning, relatability and having conversation with and getting to truly know the people who you're supposed to be patrolling, as the people you're supposed to be serving, then that will be sort of the time when we fix everything. Because there's not much more that they know. Like, there's not much more than that institution represents and has represented historically. So, yeah.
And I also was going to say that this relates back to your point earlier about getting to know the community from an early stage, because if you don't do that, then all police officers are just working off of these socially constructed, extremely dangerous, life and death stereotypes.
Right.
And that's an extremely problematic thing. So that just shows to your earlier point about the importance of getting to know the people that you are serving. That was a huge thing that you mentioned as well. officers have to reframe the way that they approach their position, serving the community, not policing the community.
So, so I think that one thing is like what is being out there, like, so the music that is being broadcasted to the world, things that's on TV, like I said before, it's like when cops see stuff like that and hear music like that, and they feel threatening to them, like, then they just get these preconceived notions that every black person is gonna be like that because they all listen to that music, or they all watch this certain TV show, or they all try to follow after this certain person. And I think one thing that officers, like, I don't think they're just taught, like, hey, if you see a black person, you know what I'm saying, arrest them. That goes back to their cultural backgrounds too. Like, if they grew up in neighborhoods and all they knew was that their parents or grandparents was racist, and then they racially profiled black people and that they did racist and indiscriminate things to them, then that's just how they're gonna be. If you are a product of who made you, like, you are who raised you, like, your parents teach you one way, or you grew up around a certain thing, that's how you're gonna grow up to be. Unless you actually grow a bigger mind to actually be open to learn about new experiences, so you won't have to be in situations where they're racially profiling.
So would you say that some of the music and some of the things that are portrayed in some of those songs, that it is okay for people to say the things that they do, and in terms of like, that's the police, like, do you think that police officers should feel offended by that, or do you think there's a deeper meaning behind it?
It's definitely a deeper meaning. Like, you go back to the 80s when NWA was already made songs like F the Police, you know, they weren't saying it, they were saying it to play across. Like, people were just listening to it in a way that's like, oh, you're just bashing police, but no, if you really listen to the lyrics of the song, they talk about the experiences and the circumstances that they have been faced with the police. If all you know is that a police officer has harassed you, attacked you, verbally abused you, physically abused you, then what is going to be your preconceived notion of it? If all my experiences have been negative, I'm going to only think negative. And it's not just the bash the police, because essentially there are black police officers, there are nice police officers, good police officers, but they're saying in a deeper sense, like, we don't understand what's going on to us. We don't like what you do. That's why we saying F the police. It's not F the police just to say it's okay, we're saying it because of this, that, one thing, this second thing, this third thing. It's not really essentially just a bash. It's just, it's more of understanding than it is just like taking it as what you think.
So, next question. So, when things like systemic racism are brought up and we have counterparts that deny it or deny the fact that these are issues, how do you confront some of these issues? How do you confront those individuals and talk about it and address them?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the best way to say this, but like, yeah, when I approach people with like this in mind, I try to go like it's easier for me because I grew up with a lot of black people at my school. So like when I try to tell my parents, it's like, what do you think is different for why I was able to go to Case and my friend like that they know had like a much harder time to do something similar. And like it always does go back to like their parents didn't put in the same values that maybe my parents did, and then like I asked why, and like it always ends up going back to the fact that like the communities that they grew up in were just oppressed, and like they try to avoid the fact like where we're at a point where now it's equal, everybody can do everything now, and then at the same time they're like their parents were not supportive of them, and like it's like this paradox because like you're saying that it's equal now, but then you're also admitting that they were not like raised equally. So like we touched on it a bit earlier, but that's like something that definitely helps.
I don't think it's equality at all. Even now, like we get a chance to go to these schools, but the roads that we have to take to get to the schools that we go to, like it took a lot for me to go to BW. Like BW was a school that I knew about growing up. You know what I'm saying? So it took me having a certain GPA and like separating myself even with the circumstances that I grew up in. Whereas in some other communities, some other people, they have an easier road. Like if my parent went to case, right? It'd be easier for me to get into case because my parent went there, or because my parent had money to put me in schools to where I'm getting a great education. So schools like Case Lester could come see my school. You know, I would have never got interested. I would have never got introduced to UW if I didn't go to Catholic school. Because schools like Ball Wallace and Case and John Grill don't go to public school. They don't go to inner city school. So I think it's just the road that we have to take to get to where we are. You know what I'm saying? So for them to say it's something that's equal, it's really not. Because it takes us a longer road and a harder road to get to these institutions that we are in.
Just sort of piggyback off of that, because I know he has to go, so I'm going to like try to be concise, but I don't think there are enough conversations about, and this also, please understand, whoever watching this video, I don't want this to come across as a woe is me type story. Like, we're not trying to have a conversation with you all to feel sorry for us. That's not the purpose of this. But there definitely does need to be conversation had because of the fact that as of right now, the only way that we can make the changes that we want to make is together, right? So that means being honest with one another and within our own cultures and ethnicities about disparities that specifically the Black culture faces, or whatever other minority cultures face, or whatever issues are prominent in other cultures as well, but specifically sort of underlying disparities, right? So stuff is as simple as let's just continue to stay on the education track. It's different going to school without having eaten both dinner and breakfast and trying to go into school for 8 hours a day and trying to focus on education, right? As a kid, it's different when, and people don't know this type of stuff, but Cleveland used to be, or is technically still, the Rust Belt, right? The buildings that Cleveland demolished didn't just up and leave. They weren't vacuumed up and taken to a landfill. They were built over. So they were demolished, and then people in Cleveland built over it. So when kids go outside, especially in the inner city, and they're outside, they're playing in dirt, they're touching bases, just being kids, they're tasting lead, right? That's all stuff. There's lead in water, right? Going all the way back to medicine, right, or the health field. The medical institutions that are in Cleveland are literally 2 and 3 minutes away from what people would consider the ghetto in Cleveland. Yet and still, the number of vaccines that go out to those places is far more minute than whatever might be given to places out in the outskirts of Cleveland or for people who might necessarily be able to afford it. All that stuff is little stuff that grows into something huge. And so on the surface level, everything might feel like it's the same because there's no animosity when I'm talking to you, right? As opposed to back in the day, I wouldn't even be able to sit here, let alone you be able to respond to me or me feel comfortable responding to you. But that's not equality, right? When we realize that all the little stuff that's lingering and that's unfair is continuing, then that's going to be the time when we understand, okay, this needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed, for us to truly be able to be considered equal. Because as of right now, how it stands is that at this point, there's just so much underlying stuff that people don't take into consideration because they don't care to. But once we lift up the blindfold, and once we're able to, just like this pandemic brought about, sit down and truthfully like acknowledge everything that's going on, is when we'll be able to have conversation about fixing what we have to fix.
I think everything that you were saying just comes down to, America has to reckon with its white supremacist history and the effect that it has had on the present moment in time. And how that occurs, I don't know specifically, but I do know that conversations like these, like I hope that this conversation, whoever listens to this, like it inspires you to have a conversation with someone else. Because continuing to talk about it, that is a step forward. It's a small one, but it is something nonetheless.
All right, so I think that was good. If we want to go around one more time, everybody gets their closing remarks, anything they want to add, anything they took from the movie or learned, we'll wrap it up from there. So.
be receptive, be open-minded to the issues that we have to face and the solutions that are brought about by the people who are oppressed and also the people who want to help the oppressed, right? Not every white person is your enemy. As a white man, not every black man is a threat. So once we can get that general consensus down, then everything is gonna be moving in the right direction towards progress. Takeaways from the movie, just continue to have conversations in honesty, right? Because that movie was an honest interpretation of what it feels like to be African American in the United States. So don't be afraid of honesty. Deal with it, move on, and learn from it.
Yeah, just closing up here, I want to say thank you to all you guys who put this together. This has been really amazing. Really glad I've been able to put this together today. I just want to say I think that each and every one of us has a duty not only to ourselves but to our fellow men and our fellow people around the world to make sure we are aware of what the lived experience of other people is like. Make sure we are aware of what is going on in the environments around us. Ignorance is sometimes a choice. Very often it is a choice, and it's a choice you gotta actively work against, and a choice that you actively have to make, not make. So,
I'll just say, please do your own research. The movie inspired me, like, to look up things just in my past as a black man, and just in America in general. So I just urge everyone to do their research and really understand, like, why things are now the way that they are. And also, like you said, take these action steps. Awareness is always great. Have these conversations with your people, and just really be for the change.
One thing that I just want to say is it's okay to talk about it, but let's like start putting our words to action. Like, let's just stop talking and let's start doing it. Like, we can all sit here and say what we think should be done, but if we don't do anything, nothing will get done. So let's just start taking action.
Yeah, there was something in the movie that we didn't get to talk about, but I wanted to like close with kind of, the officer keeps saying that like this is what we're trained to do. I think like that's an important thing. Like I think we all know what that means. So you know, it's just really important to talk to people that like are unaware of what like you have gained from being in college. Like we touched a lot about like, it's like a nice time where like over the summer a lot of people were talking to their parents for the first time about these issues, and it's something that like you said we have to do with an open mind. It's not always gonna work, but you know, like we do live in a little bit of a bubble, like going to college and being like the people that tell our parents. I think is a really big first step.
All right, yeah, so first is, you know, thank you to all you guys for setting this up. It was absolutely amazing opportunity to meet you all, converse with you all, learn about your lived experiences. And the only message I have to people listening are just, you know, one of our values of Delta is courage. And I think it takes a lot of courage to have these conversations, to educate yourself on issues such as race, inequality, and the reality is that to make change, we all have to be courageous and be fearless. And I just hope that, you know, after listening to this and watching this video, it inspires you to be fearless and continue to engage, educate yourself, and you know, as I think it was John Lewis said, you know, be on the right side of history. So, thank you.
So from Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated Pi chapter, Delta Tau Delta Zeta chapter, we thank you